Okay, so it has been 30 minutes, a little bit over, about 34, 35 minutes since I put the salts into the oven. We're going to take them out, and then we're going to let them cool down, and then we're going to get their masses and see how it looks. Now, when taking them out of the oven, it's important not to touch it with your skin, partly because you don't want to get burned, and also partly because you want to make sure that the amount of water that's present on the glass is the same as it was when you put them in the oven. So, you try to touch them with tongs or with gloved hands. Ideally gloves that don't have lint or something else that might also change the mass. Open this up and bring them out. One, two, and now I'm going to wait a few minutes while they cool down and then get their mass. Okay, just a few minutes have passed. They cooled to room temperature, and we got, oops, there we go. Just a few minutes have passed. They've cooled to room temperature, and here we are. Salt A looks to me like a slightly lighter shade of whatever was before, I think pink. And here is, oops, there is the new mass. Salt B also looks like it is perhaps a slightly lighter shade of whatever it was before. I think, I'm going to guess bluish. Here's the new mass for that. Now, we are not done with these because, as I said, we need to know how much water has left. So we need to make sure that we know that all the water has actually left. That's why we reheat it and measure it again. If the masses are the same, then we know that we've actually gotten rid of all the water. But if the mass keeps going down, that means that there's still more water to get rid of. So there's A, and there's B. And we will check back with them in another 30 minutes. Okay, it has been another 30 minutes in the oven, so let's go take out the samples. So unfortunately, once again, that was not exactly 30 minutes, that was 34 minutes. But I'm going to wait for them to cool down and then get another mass measurement. All right, so a few minutes have passed. They have cooled down close to room temperature, and I took the samples and I weighed them. And this, hold on a sec, this is the result. I've got salt A right here. And the masses for the two heatings are very close together. Now, what I said before is I said that if they are within 1% all the way up to 3% of each other, that's fine. But there's a caveat to that 1% to 3%. And that caveat is it's 1 to 3% of the mass of the salt that you added. See, 1% of this is 0.2397. And 0.2397 grams is more mass than the total amount of salt that I added to there. Is more mass than the total amount of salt that I added. So obviously, if that's what you take to be 1%, then any sort of change in mass is going to be within 1%. What you need to do is you need to figure out the amount of salt you started with here, and thus figure out the amount of salt that you have left here, the mass of the salt you left. And this number needs to be within 3% of the mass of the salt here. In this case, it is. So that is perfectly fine. With salt B, here's what it looks like, once again. And here are our two differences. Once again, the same comment. 1% of this would be 0.267, would be 0.2671 grams, which again is more than the total mass of the salt that I added. Now, if I figure out how much salt I have here, what mass I have, this is within 3%. So once again, that is perfectly acceptable. So I'm going to just bring that down here. Oops, on you. Oh, and so what do we report then? Well, if they're within 3% of each other, well, if they're exactly the same, then that's what we report. If they're within 3% of each other, then what we do is we take the average between the two. So the average there would be 1.6. So that's 6, 7, 1, 6 grams. So here's what we have for salt B. Then for salt A, once again, we take the average between the two. Which comes out to 2, 3, 9, 6, 6. The average there would be 5, 6, and then it gets, 5, 5, then it gets rounded up to another 6. So there we have here. Oh, and just comparing the colors of the two. This is salt A before, salt A after. Salt B before, and salt B after. So we can definitely tell that something has changed. All right. Now again, if you had any trouble reading any of the numbers or anything that I put down, I'm going to be including a document that I will send out to everyone. Oh, the triangles, that once again is the Greek letter delta, and what that represents here is just heat. So before heating, after heating, that's just what it is. Just like with the chapter on enthalpy. Right, cool. So that concludes the analysis. Well, that concludes the experimental part of figuring out the number of waters of hydration in the nickel complex salt. And yeah, the nickel complex salt. See you.